Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to the webinar. Our topic today is resilient automation for SAP and beyond. And we seem to have an unusually high level of interest in this topic based on the number of people that have registered for the webinar. So we hope to make this interesting for you. And thank you once again for giving us the time. So I want to go over the agenda very quickly. We're going to start with a short introduction of Worksoft and what our solutions can do for you. We'll talk about why bots break and then what you can do to fix them. And then finally, we'll do very specific examples of bot fragility and resilient automation, and also show you demos of the solution. Okay, so who's Worksoft? So we are SAP experts. We have been doing SAP automation now for over 15 years. And during this time, we've had the good fortune to work with some of the largest, most sophisticated global organizations. As you can see in this graphic, 6 of the top 10 companies in the world by revenue use SAP, and all 6 use Worksoft automation. So working with customers and doing this for a while has taught us a few lessons, right? We've learned a few things. And the most important thing that we've learned is that it's very easy to build initial automation, right? Anybody can build a few bots. What's a lot more difficult to do is to get sustained value from automation over a multi-year period. So in that respect, we are very proud of what our customers have been able to achieve, with their efforts. So we can, show you PowerPoint slides, and we can tell you what analysts think. But in the end, results on the ground are the only thing that matter, right? And so, we encourage people to look at our customers and use what they have achieved as inspiration, as well as a roadmap for your own efforts. Okay. So how do you do automation right? The first thing when you do automation is to figure out what to automate. Now, this seems like a very simple question and very straightforward thing, but in practice, that's hard to do. So how do you figure out what to automate? To do that, you have to understand your business processes. And that understanding comes primarily from 2 sources. It's by looking at what your end users, your employees do on a day-to-day basis. That's one source of information. And then the second one is by analyzing information that's stored in your systems. Okay. So both of these things can be automated, and that's called automated process discovery. The act of figuring out what your processes are and what areas should be automated itself can be automated, right? So the first part of RPA is automated process discovery. Once you figure out what your business processes look like, the next part is to put a framework in place to make sure that those processes are working properly all the time. And the reason this is important is because a single business process could traverse dozens, maybe hundreds of applications. And a change in any one of those applications could potentially break your business process. In addition to the application complexity, you're also dealing with a dynamic business environment. So your business rules change, your objectives are changing. So your processes are also evolving on a constant basis, right? So if you couple those things together, it is critical that you have something in place to constantly make sure that your processes are working all the time. And for that, you have continuous test automation, right? So you can automate that and use that for that purpose. And then when we shift into production, we have some additional considerations that you add on top, right? Which is, how do you get the right workflows in place so that only approved bots can move to production? How do you handle security? How do you handle encryption, non-repudiation? And then finally, how do you handle compliance, right? Do you have audit trails? Do you know exactly who did what, when, so that if something goes wrong, you can trace back what happened? And then finally, are you monitoring the bots all the time so that if something goes wrong, you can immediately fix it? So that's one aspect that's a layer that gets added on top. So the interesting thing about Worksoft automation is that the way you build test automation and the way you build RPA is exactly the same. So the same people can do it. Not only can the same people build test automation and RPA, but you can also reuse automation components across both functions, right? So a component that you build for test automation can be used also for RPA. The upside of this is that if you find during testing that there is a problem and you fix that automation component, while your bot's fixed instantly, right? So you have to do something extra to fix the bot now. The other thing that happens is because the same team is doing both things, they are aware of all the changes that are occurring, right, to the applications, to the business processes, because they're on the front end of this. So they can anticipate problems that might occur in production automation when those things happen. And then they can actually go fix it, before it becomes a problem, right? So that's something that we can do. Okay. So why is it important to have a single seamless platform that does all three things? And the reason for this is because there's only one problem, right? So the problem that most people are trying to address is, how can I make my business processes better continuously, right? So how do I deliver business outcomes where I have better customer satisfaction, or I can innovate faster, or I can actually get more revenue or address new markets? So you have to look at things strategically when it comes to your business processes and ensure that you are constantly making them more efficient, more optimized, and get your foreground attention away from just the mechanics of running them, which automation can handle, to the strategy of how they need to be to better serve the needs of your business as it evolves, right? So a single seamless platform can help you do that, right? What it can also do is it can actually help foster better collaboration between different parts of your company, right? The business, IT, operations, compliance. So think of automation as being fluid, right? Like water flowing through the different phases of your business process, right? Starting at discovery, then going into implementation and customization, then going into deployment, and then going into continuous improvement in production. Right? All that is something that flows smoothly from one phase to the other and back. So having a platform that makes this connection, that connects these dots, gets you to better collaboration, but also gets automation to become seamless across all phases of your business processes, right? And that's what gets you automation at a much larger scale and gets you ROI that extends beyond the immediate and into, sustained multi-year periods. All right. Okay. So let's look at this one statement here, right? So this is what we hear not just from Shell, who's quoted here, but also from a lot of different customers. We heard that from you today, right? You said you don't automate SAP, and the primary reason is that you think that the bots are going to break, so your automation efforts not going to be to create the value that you're looking for. So if 30 to 50% of RPA projects fail, and this is outright failure, mind you, right? This is not meeting expectations, and then you don't get the right value from what you're doing, what people then do is they default to doing only simple things, right? So I call this the tyranny of lowered expectations. Because you don't know what is really possible, you compromise and you only automate just very simple things, and then you realize that the effort that you spent doing that is not worth it, right? So what we are saying is in our experience, it is very possible to automate complex end-to-end business processes that are very sophisticated, that go across multiple systems, that have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of steps. You can do that, right? And then that's kind of how you have to set your goals and expectations when it comes to resilient automation. Next slide, please. Okay, so why do bots break, right? There are many different reasons why bots break, right? The main reason is application changes, right? Applications change frequently, right? If you use any cloud-based application or SaaS application, their release cycles are much faster, right? You might get multiple releases a year, right? Most major enterprise apps have anywhere from at least 2 to 4 to 6 releases that you have to deal with, right? And each time a release occurs, if the core automation is not good, you then will have to fix it. The other thing that happens is, right, you have objects, that constitute the front end of these applications, right? Those things change. The HTML markup changes, XPath changes, right? Things get moved around the screen. There are personalization aspects that change things around. And for a lot of automation, right, they rely on scripts or coding, and the code also is fragile and it breaks, right? So there are reasons, myriad of reasons why bots break, and it takes a lot of work and experience to kind of first realize this and then to fix it, right? So you can't just do this overnight, right? You can't just produce automation for SAP that says, hey, I realize these problems and therefore tomorrow I have a solution, right? No, you have to go through multiple cycles. You have to go through some experience. You have to go through large projects to systematically understand, realize, fix these sort of problems. And we'll show you some examples of how we address those, right? But the key here is, right, you have to go under the skin of the applications. You can't look at them just from the surface, right? You got to match up what's below the surface and what's above the surface together to produce an outcome that you want. Okay. All right. So let's talk about a model-based framework, that serves as the scaffolding, if you will, to create resilient automation. So the way we do this is, we understand patterns in applications, right? So patterns within the SAP suite of applications, patterns inside SuccessFactors or Salesforce or any number of other cloud-based enterprise applications. And the idea there is we model them as a set of objects, like things that show up on a screen, like a button or like a table or a drop down, and then you can perform actions against those objects, right? So the idea is that if I see a button, I could push it, right? If I see a drop down, I can select something from it. If I see a table, I can find a row in it, and so on, right? So we have this construct of, you have a set of pages or a set of windows in applications, and on those windows you have a set of objects, right? And the objects can move around, the objects can change, the objects have a life of their own, and then with those objects you can take certain actions to do something, right? Like push the button or choose them or whatever. So separating out those constructs is the first part, and then figuring out how to recognize those objects consistently is the next thing, right? So next slide, please. Okay, so let's say an object gets changed, right? Let's say the object gets changed from one version of the application to another. What we are doing is we are constantly evaluating those objects as we run automation, right? So every time we look at a page, if something has changed, we know it has changed, and we compare it to what we already know about that particular object. And if we find that things have changed, we automatically update our definition, our model of that object, right? So we have AI algorithms that are looking to see if things are similar or if things have changed. And this is not exact match, right? There could be subtle differences that occur. But the idea is to do this continuously, right? So every time you run automation, every time you see some other pattern, you say, okay, well, I'm seeing this pattern occur. for the same object, so I need to update my definition for that object. I now have this independent repository of objects for a given application, right? I can make multiple application versions, or I can make multiple versions of the objects, but every time I encounter that object in hundreds of automation runs, I keep updating those information, right? And then I also do something else, right? I have multiple paths to identifying that object, right? And so I can find that object in 10 different ways. And so in real time, I can apply 3 or 4 or 5 strategies to figure out where that thing is. And therefore, I don't really rely on XPaths. I don't really rely on the DOM. I don't really rely on surface level stuff to look for something, right? I do a much deeper analysis of how to find something and then have this repository to use. Okay, next. Okay, so now let's say I update the definition of an object. That object is on, I don't know, 20 different pages on 30 different screens or whatever, you know, and I have maybe 10,000 tests that are using that particular page in a process step, right? If I update that definition once, every single one of that automation set of processes now get updated automatically, right? So one update to one object fixes, 10,000 steps, maybe in 100 different processes that you're automating. That's the beauty of the model and the object action framework is a single update proliferates across the entire set of automation. And you don't have to worry about going back and looking at everything, right? It's just done automatically. We're also doing it dynamically and consistently over and over and over again. So sometimes you won't even realize that something is changed or broken. The system's already fixed it for you, right? So this whole self-healing property of automation is something that we anticipated and have kind of honed in over the last 15 years to get you this kind of resiliency in the bots. Next slide. Okay, so with this, I want to now turn over to my colleague, Phil, who's actually going to show you some examples of this and also show you demos of how this works, specifically in the SAP context. Phil, take it away.
Thank you, Shoaib. Hello, everybody. So yes, as said, I'm going to take us through a couple of examples in the slides, and then I'll show some demos as well of the solution. So what we have on the slide here is on the left, we've got sort of a diagram of how we think about the contents of our solution, the applications that we see, and we've got records for things like the windows that we see, and then the objects that we see on those windows. So if I look on the right-hand side, we've got, say, a capture process. Now, if you're not familiar with our solution, capture is a very lightweight tool. We can give it to business users. They can record their process. And in the process of doing that, they will touch on various objects. So in this case, they use this leave type dropdown. Okay. We will see that as an object in the capture. We will store it in our database, in our repository of objects. And we also understand exactly what that thing is. It's not just an object with a title. We know what kind of actions we can do with it. We know we can do things like verify what text is on it. We can verify if it exists, those kinds of actions. So we know what kind of object this is, but we've stored a single copy of it because one person's run through that as a process. What might then happen is more captures happen, and they all run through maybe the same object. So we've now got 4 processes that we're looking at in our solution. They all use the same object on the same screen, and we store a single copy of that. What that's going to mean is, if we need to make any changes, we can make a change to a single copy of that object, and it will repair all those processes. So maybe we have an update. Maybe we go to a new release. Maybe there was a problem with that dropdown, and they released a bug fix. Whatever it is, it breaks the automation in this particular case. And we may now have 1,000 processes all using this object. We just need to make that one change, whatever it is. Maybe we need to relearn that object with this, that's a very simple process for us. But we can do that. We make a single change to our repository, maybe to one object, and we self-heal all the other processes that rely on that. rather than having code in every script that defines the same object that you've then got to go and figure out what processes run through that object, go and find those scripts and change them. We make a single change and fix everything. So the kinds of situations that we'll get into, we're going to run through this, and then we'll run through a similar scenario to this in the demo. Let's say we're using the SAP GUI, and we're going to change it to its Fiori theme. Okay, we've decided that we want all our users to use that, and it's going to change the look and feel of various things. Things will move around, different things will happen. So, you know, the OKCD will be in a different place. We'll have system information moved around. The toolbars vanished on us. All of these things can happen. These are things that we're going to be able to cope with due to the way that we capture those objects, due to everything that Shob was just talking about in the way that we identify change when it happens. You know, it's a better interface. In this case, things like that table, right? Before we would have had to scroll to see that as a human, and now that table's there. We can just see it straight away. If we were using the web interface, because we work not just with the SAP GUI, we'll work with all the web interfaces, you know, and we don't care about the technologies behind them, if it's UI5, if it's WebDim Pro, if it's all those kinds of things that sit behind the front page. We understand all those. We've been working with those for years. So, you know, maybe you've gone from 1610 to 1809, and your tiles have moved around slightly, or they've got slightly different names. We'll cope with that because we understand those interfaces. We know what they're leading us to. The one thing that obviously we would need is the field. So you can see in these two examples, we've got, you know, the sold to, the shipped to party. They exist on both, but there was a lot more sort of mess on the original version. We go do an upgrade, things have been moved. That table's a lot more accessible for people when they're using that. That's not going to phase us at all. We're going to be able to cope with that again due to the way that we recognize objects in the UI. So before I just get into the demo, before we created the RPA process, we'd have been on a bit of a journey. And I just wanted to run through that journey because I'm not going to cover all of these in the demos that we'll see. So ideally, we'd start at process intelligence. Process intelligence will enable us to see our processes that are running in the business and identify good candidates for automation. That might be in the sort of examples I'm going to run through. We may have a particular type of sales order that's coming in. It's getting put into an inbox somewhere, and people are maybe ignoring it for longer than we'd like. So we want to automatically pick that up, get it entered, get that process rolling to stop that being a delay with a manual process. So we're going to identify our process that we want. We're going to get the business users who would normally operate that process to capture it and tell us how that process works. They're just going to use that capture tool. From that, we can also instantly create documentation. So single click, give me the document of that. It's all really easy for them. And then we'll move into the areas that we're going to see in the demo. So the resilient automation, that capture will give us the test steps or the automation steps that we're going to run. We'd refine those. We'd make variables. We'd make it more model driven so that we can just throw lots of different data through the same process. Then we'd convert it to RPA, which is really just saying, hey, rather than pulling in test data, we want to pull in production data. So we've got to make that change to say, what's our data source that we're going to use, and then we can publish it into production. And a key thing for us is that none of this involves writing any code. For all the way from the capture through to creating the test automation, through to publishing the RPA, nobody really should be writing any code. There's nowhere in our applications that you can go in and write code to make things happen. It's all done in a very simple way. So this demo, the first demonstration we're going to see, there's a process that we've built. It's been built against an older version. It's been built against 1610. We're going to run some process steps against the SAP GUI. We're going to run exactly the same process steps against 1610 in Fiori, against 1809 in Fiori, and there's no changes that I'm going to need to make. So this could be a journey that your process has gone on across time. We've updated the interface, we've updated the version, and it will be the same process due to the sort of the magic that we have in the background. So this is the process. You can see the process steps there. That's what our interface looks like when we're building automation. And we've got a record set. So these 3 rows mean that this process will loop through 3 times. And the last row is the 1809. That's why it's got slightly different data. This is going to be run. And we're just going to change a setting to put in, we're going to capture screenshots of every step, just so we can go and look at what happened on every step. And we'll run that. Okay. So it's pulled up the SAP GUI. So this would be the initial 1610. And we're running through, and we're running a sales order type process. And then this prompt is just because we want you to see the difference between the different runs. They wouldn't normally have that kind of thing in the process. So the automation's actually going to go and set the visual theme for us to the Fiori theme. And then we're going to run the same process steps. It's not a different set of steps. It's exactly the same automation running, but against a different interface. Now it's going to change to 1809. So it's going to check that Fiori interface is set, and then we've loaded 1809, and then we're going to run the same process again. Okay, but with that 3rd row of data with the slightly different sold to and shipped to parties. Okay. So that process will finish, and then we'll see our results. So we've had one process, VA01, run 3 times. That was the name of the process, and it ran through 3 times. This is the original 1609. So you can see the toolbar and things at the top of the screen. And we ran through that. Okay, everything's got green ticks. If we had something fail, we'd have a red cross indicating we've got a problem. And then we've got the same steps, the second run through the same steps, using the Fiori style interface. So that we're still entering C1000 as our data. That's what we had in 1610 there. It runs a sub-process. So one of the steps in the main process is to run the sub-process to tick that box. That's what that's just showing there. That ran 3 times as well. And then this one is running 1809. So you can see it loaded a different SAP system, and we didn't have to do anything to our process. So that would be a journey that maybe our process has been on, over a number of years, but we wouldn't have had to have edited it. It would have just carried on churning away in the background, giving us the results that we want. So that's sort of an indication of how robust our automation is. We can change the interface. You can see a run through of it changing. The next thing is, well, that's obviously quite a manual run that we did there. If you want it to be an RPA process, there's going to be a lot more governance and things like that around it. This is where our RPA Orchestrator solution comes in. This includes a built-in project workflow. So the idea is you'd start a project, you'd gather evidence as to what you wanted to do in that project, you create the RPA model, get it approved, and publish it out. And for each of those steps, you're going to want different people to have permissions to do things. So it's lots of roles and permissions that you can specify to enable who's supposed to be doing what piece of this process. There's all sorts of logging that we've introduced. So every single thing that the process does, like those results we were looking at the end of the previous process run, you get all of that. You get everything that the system did, what processes it ran, when it ran them, what systems it ran them on, what digital workers it used to run them, all of that kind of information, how long they took. And then any activity on the UI. So every time somebody changes something, all of that information, that's all logged and saved away securely in the databases. Behind this, there are 2 types of digital worker. So there's a manual digital worker. So you can create a process, publish it, and somebody will have to log on to Orchestrator and click the button to make it run. So maybe something you run once a year that's really complicated maybe, but you don't want it trying to see if there's something to do every 5 minutes all year. Or you can have the auto run, the job queue workers, who will look every 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever you've got them set to. They'll wake up, look for work to do, and process whatever they need to. So if we get into that, this is the front screen, the thing that you would see first when you log in. So it's a nice dashboard. So if we're monitoring this system, we're responsible for it. We can see how many projects we've got, how many digital workers. We can see if there are any problems going on. So, over various periods that we might want to select. We get that as a graph as well. So I can see I've got 1 failure. That's a bit worrying. This is a production system. So maybe I'd want to use that link, failed link, and drill into that. And I could get all of the detail that I was talking about, what process it was, and so on. There's 2 types of statuses there. the process is failing and the system having issues. That's a list of RPA projects, the last ones that ran. And if I clicked on the execution info button, you'd get the results of those processes like we saw in Certify in the automation tool earlier. If I go to the project list, we can see that there's a project waiting for my action. So I can go in and it takes me straight to where I need to be. But let's rewind a bit. What we have here is the start of a project. I'd need to give it a name. And then I want to specify the users that can do various things. They'd probably be more varied than the ones that you see there. But you see, I've got various users, and they all relate to the 5 steps of the workflow there. Who can do what? And quite often the publisher will be quite a lockdown role, because once you do that, it's in production. You've got a stage to discover, to upload captured business processes, to upload documentation, to gather the evidence that somebody's going to need to create this automated process, which might include the automated process that you already have as a test process ready to go. That's the bulk of the work. That's something we find quite a lot with users who already have our test tools. Once the automation engineers uploaded that, it will appear here. So they can download all this information that exists. You can see there's a capture that's been uploaded. There's RPA assets, which is documents and things like that. And then the RPA model has actually been uploaded after it's been created. Once that's all there, there's a checklist we can check on, and then we move through to the next stage. This is where we have a chance to try it out before we actually publish it. Okay, so we're going to try it out on the real systems. We're going to choose execute. We've chosen a manual worker just to run this against. And that manual worker will pick it up in a couple of minutes, but to speed things up, we can just stop and start it. So if we just get that started. Okay. And then we can spy on it. So you might spy on things if you're trying to debug something that's going on or do these trial runs, but in reality, you'd be leaving these users just to get on with the job. So we've got our email system. We've got an email in here. This is what we're going to go and pick up. It's got an order form attached to it, and we want to process that in. We can see that email's just changed to red. The worker's loaded up Excel to read that order form. Then it's going to load up SAP, and it's going to take the data that was attached to that email. It's going to move it over, obviously, and do the data entry into the SAP system. Now, I'm using a sales order, but quite a lot of these processes are things like audit type processes where you want to pull out a whole bunch of information. It's quite a tedious job to go through and follow the original trail, but you can get the process to do that for you and produce, say, a document at the end with screenshots and all the bits of information. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm returning an email back to itself and back to the original sender saying, this was the email that came in, this was the order number I generated, this was the delivery number I generated. But that's the kind of sorts of things that we can do. We can pick up a process, run it, we trial run it, and we would then go through and request that to be published. So whoever had published permission would be able to click that button and send it through, and it would become a process, presumably on a scheduled worker that's going to run that, say, every 5 minutes and pick up the latest emails. If we pick up a process that's already been published, so we can see if we were to log on, we could see the big green box. That means everything's good. I could execute that manually, just choose a manual worker, or we could pick up a digital worker and run that there. Okay, so those are sort of 2 demos of what we can do, and I will now move it on. Sure.
Thanks, Phil. So to wrap up, I just wanted to summarize some of the things that we talked about, right? So the first part of doing good RPA is to shorten the time to scale, right? So how do you get critical mass automation fast? And you need a solution that allows multiple people and multiple different functions to collaborate seamlessly, right? So if you have business IT collaborating, that's how you get to scale faster, right? Therefore, our solution is built both for technical and non-technical people and does not require coding, and that's how you get to scale faster. Next, right, faster time to value, right? So which means you got to be able to run automation as quickly as you can and as often as you can. And a lot of times, right, people wait for things to become stable before building automation. We don't, right? We can build automation when things are constantly changing. So it's not a problem for us to run automation early in the cycle and often in the cycle. And that's how you get more value from what you're building. Next, right? We talked about bot fragility, which was the whole topic of this particular webinar. So solving this long running problem is definitely very important. And then next, you have to understand the packaged applications underneath your business processes, right? So you need to understand the patterns in those applications. You need to understand how to model them. You need to go below the skin, under the skin, if you will. And so that gets you more resilient automation by understanding the applications that the automation is working with. And finally, right, you need the full audit, right? As Phil showed you, right, we can see who did what, when they did it, approval workflows, all of that has to be seamless, right? You don't need to cobble together 20 different solutions to put that together, right? So that's what we offer in terms of the full orchestration, full monitoring, full compliance, full audits.